Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia, here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and author interviews. This week I have 5 new reviews for you folks at home. That's going to include Purgatory, The Devil's Game, Dungeon Walkers 2, Battlefield Reclaimer, Liberty Progression, Guardian of Aster Fall, book number 1, Biomancer, which is the new book in the New Era Online universe, and also Solo Spellcaster, which is going to be an online manga that I'm reviewing this week for you. But before we get into any of that, of course, we're going to go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we just got one little bit here. The Gentleman's War card game, Thievery, Cheatery, and Fun is being produced by Shadow Valley Press. They started a Kickstarter campaign, and as of right now, it's about a bit over $6,000 to their $17,000 goal, with about 20 days left on the clock to get that thing funded. It is a fun game. It's a card game. They actually sent us an early packet, which is around here somewhere. We actually put up a unpacking video on the LitRPG podcast YouTube page. If you want to go check that out, it's, you can get a first-hand up-close look at all those wonderful cards. And there are quite a few, including one for this guy right here. There's a blown-up shot of the artwork they used for the actual card. As you can see, that was one of the days that I didn't shave. Apparently that was the one they decided to use for that artwork, and I'm called the Whisperer. Okay, so there you go. And it's a fantastic project. There are a lot of the character artwork is from the Shadow Alley catalog of characters from the from all the number of projects that they've done, and also a lot of LitRPG authors that you enjoy. So it very much is a game of like, oh, can you find your favorite author in this artwork? So there you go. I'm putting over a link in the show notes for the Kickstarter campaign for getting the Gentleman's War card game. So go check it out. Okay, on to stuff that is out now. This is stuff that's come out since the last episode of the podcast. That is going to include Sentenced to Troll, book number 4. Also Purgatory, The Devil's Game, which we're actually reviewing on the show this week. Also An Old Man's Journey. Also Commando, Battlegrounds Online, book number 2 by Troy Osgood. We also have the 3rd book in the Land of Drunken Pharaohs by Christopher Johns. Apocalypse Online, book number 2. Folks seem to enjoy book number 1, so hopefully this one does well as well. The Weight of It All, book number 4, Collapse, seems to be doing well as well. Also, Project Stellar, book number 5 is out. In the System, book number 3 is out. The 5th book in the Divine Apostasy series, called Legion's 5th Vault, out for you to enjoy. The 4th book in Overtaken Online. The 2nd book in the Cowboy Necromancer series by the always well-written Harmon Cooper. We also have Jake's Magical Market. This one is a little bit of one that slipped under the radar for me, at least. The author was nice enough to let us know that his book came out, and it seems to be doing well on reviews. We also have a new Dungeon Core novel from Jonathan Brooks called Core Establishment Dimensional Dungeon Core, book number 1. There's a new omnibook collection from KT Hanna for her Somnia Online series, books 4 through 7, which I believe completes the collection. So the omnibus for those books is out for you. Also, Biomedical Self-Engineering, book number 3 is out. A couple books from Stuart Gross. A reminder, these are adult-oriented. There is sex, there is adult content, there is also evil content. People doing some really bad things in some of these stories. Stuart Gross's Loot Dungeon, and also Into the Black. So Into the Black, book number 30 in that series. 30 of anything is amazing, man. So Stuart Gross, congratulations. Even if it's not a series that I've kept up on, it's good for you for writing 30 of anything. I also have the 6th book in the Abduction Chronicles called Legacy of Merlin. The 3rd book in the Steampunk series called The Steampunk World of Gearnix, Reborn as a Baron Lord, book number 3. And that's it for the stuff that I found that in the ebook section. New stuff that it's an audiobook as well. So for folks who love audiobooks, this is the portion of the list that's for you, including Divine Apostasy book number 5. They're doing a simultaneous ebook and audiobook release. We also have Initialization, a LitRPG Adventure, Master Hunter K book number 1. So there you go, as an audiobook. Waga, Alpha Physics book number 1 is out. Also, Jeff the Game Master book number 2 is out as an audiobook, as is Chrono Templar, a Crunchy LitRPG, is out as an audiobook. A new book in the System Apocalypse series, which is a Tao Wong universe, is out, called Fistful of Credits. Is the first book in, again, that kind of side spin-off series set in the same universe, in the same planet, just with different characters. We also have a compilation or omnibus collection as an audiobook, the entire Hive trilogy, Trinity of the Hive, books 1 through 3 in the series. Also, Isekai Magus, book number 3, is out as an audiobook. And this trilogy is broken. The third book in that series, This Guild is Baddie. Condition Evolution book number 4 is out as an audiobook, as is the 11th book in the Good Guys series, Killing Them Awfully. Reality Benders book number 7, Cause for War, is out as an audiobook. This one is the Dungeon of Envy, the 7 Deadly Demons, book number 1. The second book in the Pocket Cosmos series, Magus, is out as an audiobook. Sierra Online is out. Engineering Ludus, this one actually, you won't find it in an Audible under the normal stuff associated with LitRPG. It is a little more gameless, apparently, according to the author. And it's got Engineering Ludus by Stephen Keller. It is set again in the Ludus universe, which is Blaze Corbin, universe, but this is a side series. Actually spun off from a short story that was written for a Ludus kind of collection, and it was popular enough that it's its own novel, and some folks have really enjoyed it. Also, Darklands Online book number 2 is out, and a new book in the Threadbare series. So Threadbare 4, Friends with Bunny Feats. So Andrew Sipple has a new Threadbare story, if you enjoy that story universe. Also, Respawn book number 6 is out, as is Rise to Omniscience book number 10, Overtaken book number 3, The Range, Lord of the Runes book number 2 is out. This is a Russian translation story. Sci-fi-ish, little guns and shooting kind of stuff more in there. So that's out as an audiobook. So that's all the stuff I found for audiobooks. On to stuff that is coming out in the near future. I have stuff that I've scrolled through Amazon. I've collected all the stories I could find that are pre-orders all the way up until the end of the year. I put them together so you can plan out your reading schedule, your publishing schedule for an author. There were definitely some places on this list where like, oh, we got 5 books out in one day. Well, that's a lot of reading to do. Or you might want to put your book out on a different day. Just saying. Okay, starting on October the 18th, we have Unfrozen book number 2. We also have on October the 19th, Dark on Prince. October the 19th, a new story from Portal Books, Rise to Glory. We have October 21st, Bleeding Edge. On October 21st as well, it's going to be Player Reaches the Top book number 7. On October 26th, it'll be the 5th book in an NPC's Path series called Nemesis of the Living. October the 26th, the 3rd book in the Maddest series. They called me Maddest. On October 26th as well, it'll be Infinite Realms book number 3. October 26th, it'll be the Titan series book number 8. October 27th, Wolfman Warlock book number 2, Libero Hexer, a completionist cross-all series. Now, this is actually a collaborative project between James Hunter and Dakota Kraut. It is set in Dakota's completionist chronicle universe, but it is with an independent character who sort of parallels his story with what happens with the main character in the completionist chronicle. So you will see him on the parallel of events that occur in that universe, like big world-changing events, like the different invasions, the different projects or whatever happening in the universe. So you see this character where he's at, but he is an independent character. He doesn't necessarily cross with anybody yet, but you still see little cameos here and there. So, but it's a fun book. October 20th, it'll be Blessed Time Coda. We actually reviewed book number 1, enjoyed it. October 26th, it'll be Underverse book number 6, a very popular series in the Underverse universe by Jez Cairo. On October 31st, it'll be Sword to Plowshare Saga book number 1. It'll be November the 1st for and again, another series set in the System Apocalypse universe by Tao Wong. This one is called Town Under, a post-apocalyptic LitRPG set in Australia. So this is an Australia-focused System Apocalypse book written by Katie Hanna, who is probably most best known for in our circles at LitRPG for Somnia Online. She's collaborating with Tao Wong for a System Apocalypse book of herself. On November the 3rd, it'll be Towers of Acalia, book number 5 in that series. On November the 4th, it'll be Discardian, book number 9. November the 9th, it'll be The Legend of Randomly Ghost Town, which I hear is good. November the 11th, it'll be The Range, book number 3. November the 16th, it'll be Gates of Thunder, Loner, book number 1. November the 16th, it'll be Bright Finish This. November the 16th, it'll be The Houndsman, a base building LitRPG. November the 18th, Valhalla Online, book number 5, Burn It Down, a LitRPG adventure. I believe this is the last book in the series. The author, Kevin McLaughlin, has actually revamped his books. He's got new covers. I believe he's done some editing, some changes to the story a little bit here and there. And he's republished like the original, I want to say, it's 3 or 4 books. But I think he only had one left in the series. And so this is the last one, which will be published on November 18th, which I believe will finish out the entire project and that entire storyline. On November the 19th, it'll be Isle of Destiny, Buccaneers Due, book number 1. November the 19th, Alpha Physics, book number 3, Disquiet. Remember, the first book in this series is actually out as an audiobook. November the 22nd, The King's Soul, book number 2 is out. On November 23rd, it'll be Hero Killer, Neverstone, book number 2. November 23rd as well, it'll be The Wandering Inn, book number 5, which I'm sure everybody's looking forward to. It's very popular. It's called The Last Light. On November 30th, it'll be Defiance of the Fall, book number 3, another popular series. December the 1st, it'll be VR Hero, book number 5. December the 7th, Morkster Chef, book number 1, Cleaver's Edge. This one has actually changed release date a couple times. I'm not sure if it's actually going to stay here, but we'll see on December the 7th, if it comes out. December the 9th, it'll be An Outcast in Another World, book 2, title pending. That's literally what it says. So we'll see what actually pops up. December the 10th, Aster's Fall, Guardian of Asterfall, book number 2. This is, we're actually reviewing book 1 in the series. So there you go. But book number 2 will be out on December the 10th. I honestly wish that the title information was a little more connected to the first book. December the 14th, it'll be Uncontrollable, a LitRPG adventure. December the 15th, Clan Dominance of the Sleepless Ones, book number 9. December the 16th, Don't Slip Up, Fantasia, book number 2 will be out. December 22nd, it'll be Real Wuxia series, The Way, book number 4, The Frost Ridge, The First Circle. December the 21st, Epiphany Realms, book number 2. December 26th, a new book in the Adventures of Brad series from Tao Wong. On December the 28th, it'll be Level 0, Alpha Realm, book number 3. December 28th, the 4th book in the He Who Fights a Monster series. So all kinds of great stuff coming out in the near future. And that's all the stuff I have till the end of the year for 2021. So go check it out. Go plan your reading schedule or publishing schedule, whatever helps you out. But we're going to move on to new releases and reviews. Okay, first on the list this week is going to be Purgatory, The Devil's Game by M.A. Carlson. It is 553 pages. It is $5.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Throughout the history of man, God and Lucifer have matched wits in games to decide the fate of man's immortal soul. Victor Goodspeed has just learned he's a pawn in the most recent game with his own soul at stake. Now he needs to fight his way through Purgatory if he wants to find his place in the afterlife. So there we go. Full disclosure, I received advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. Okay, first of all, I really thought this was a great story in the end. I was a little hesitant about it at the beginning with some of the themes. But I'm also kind of sad to see that it's not getting the love that I think it deserves. This is one of those underrated stories that I think that a lot of folks, when they first read the sample sizing or they look at the cover art or they look at some of the themes with religion, heaven and hell kind of stuff, they are kind of put off by it, just like I was, to be honest. But I assure you, this is a good, entertaining story. People who like RPG stories and LitRPG are going to enjoy this. Give it a shot. And if you have read it and you really enjoyed it, please give it a review, because this one definitely needs some extra love and attention. It's just not doing as well, and as I really think it should, because it is a great story. And by the end, I was like, wow, this is great. But I'll get into the full review right now. The start of the story wasn't my favorite, I'll be honest. It was a little off-putting by the religious elements in the theme, as I said before. And my experience in introducing actual religious themes, like real life religious stuff, kind of goes sideways sometimes. In this case, there are Christian themes like a monotheistic God, devils, Lucifer, angels, hells, heaven, purgatory. And in my experience in other stories, they aren't done well. Like, either they are being made fun of, or they're taken super seriously, and it kind of turns into sermonizing. And that's not the case here, thankfully. But it was one of those things I was really concerned about. If you have those concerns, put them to the side. Like, this is generally just, it's kind of just a setting. There's like, if you're familiar with sort of these concepts, it's like, oh, these little Easter eggs, or these little like notes, or these little like name dropping from like the history of this religion. Like, oh, okay, I get these things. But at its core, it's really still is a dungeon dive. And you still get your leveling, you get your character progression, you get all your class progression stuff in the story. And once it's past like that 8% mark, when the actual dungeon diving starts, I think anybody who enjoys LitRPG, dungeon diving stories, and action adventure kind of stuff is like, oh, okay, this is super familiar. I'm okay with this. This is like just like a weird kind of theme for the story, and with its own sort of tail end philosophical stuff, which I thought was kind of bumped it up for me. But I'll get into that. Most of the stories, again, is a dungeon dive, and it's pretty evident by really clearly in the story, once you get into that stuff, that it's every person in this purgatory is going through their own version of a dungeon, so that they can get out of purgatory. Once they complete their dungeon, then they go somewhere else. But until you do, you're kind of stuck there. And it really is an interesting setting for a dungeon for a dungeon dive story, because there are some people who've been in purgatory for literally thousands of years, apparently. And it's just whenever you complete it, whenever you do what you need to do with this dungeon, then you go on. And so that's kind of the core idea for the main character, like him going through his own themed dungeon that deals with his own issues. And I did enjoy it. The story doesn't just stick to like any one person's or any one group's idea of religion and themes and whatever, because each dungeon is really about that person's belief system. And so you have in the story, this is minorly spoilery, but I want to kind of share it with you just so you see that there's a big variety of like kind of core belief systems. Like there's like a Viking in the story, there's a hacker who's also going through prayer at the same time. And each one of them, as they describe what their dungeon looks like, you see, oh, this is very much based upon your own ideas of whatever. For the Viking, his dungeon experience is very much like wave after wave of monsters at different locations. But for our main character, it is different. A lot of the things that are pulled in his dungeon are based on pop culture. They're not actually based on any religious text. And so it's an interesting mix of mythical backgrounds and monsters and things. So I thought it was like, okay, that's a nice little mix there. And a good middle part of the story is really just like this dungeon diving stuff. And I like the variety of monsters. I like the build that the main character is going for. You don't see a lot of sword and mace kind of stuff going on, but I like this combos. I like his eventual builds. And each level had its own unique theme and its own unique twist to kind of get through it, which I thought was kind of neat. And by the last 27% of the story, that was probably the section that I thought really bumped it up to great for me, at least, because any time that you can get me to think, or you get me to kind of philosophize, like, oh, what's the nature of good and evil, or, anything like that, it's like, oh, that's extra special, because this could have just been a dungeon dive story, and I think it would have been good. I think it would have been, 7.5, like middle of the road good. But the thing that really bumped it up for me is like, oh, that last 25%, when like the conclusion of the story, elements are being tied up, you see that, oh, the purgatory stuff really has more meaning than just a dungeon dive with increasing RPG progression stuff. There's a real introspective twist and philosophical like understanding of what it means for this main character to go through this process, to go through these levels, and to go through literally these levels of his own personal dungeon in purgatory with these monsters he overcomes. And I liked that. I thought it was like a nice element of the story that really made his personal progression meaningful and really advanced his character growth in a meaningful, and it made the dentist of the camera go, okay, oh, that's what that meant for that particular theme. And I was like, oh, okay. And anytime, again, you can get me like kind of like pause and like, oh, that's an interesting concept to think about. I hadn't, and I'll spend like 5 minutes just like, just thinking about it. That's special to me. So that's really, for me at least, what made the story a great story instead of just a good story. So there we go. So and again, by the end of the story, antagonist is all tied up in a nice way. Even though I thought for a bit like, is he going to bring this back or has he forgotten? Like, nope, everything's nicely tied up. Everything resolved very satisfactorily for me. On the game mechanic side of things, lots and lots of good RPG progression stuff. Nothing here to complain about. Rewards for killing demons in the dungeon give you crystals and experience. Crystals are a currency in Purgatory. They let you buy special powers from like a marketplace, or special gear or abilities, or just food and alcohol, which I thought was a nice way to pass the time in Purgatory. Drinking with your friends at the local bar. I was like, hey, if you're going to be there for hundreds of years, you might as well have good food and alcohol. And again, gears, abilities, stats can all be upgraded, experience points, and a number of abilities and powers. And what I thought late in the story was a nice little twist, I'll be honest. I was like, some of the limits that appear and change the way the main character thinks about how he's building his class. I was like, oh, yeah, there's like some seriously like reminiscent frustration that I was feeling with the main character. I could really empathize with him when he hits this reveal, I don't want to spoil your limitations, or like twist on the game mechanics. I was like, oh, that's devious. That is almost like super evil author. And then Carlos, because I could absolutely empathize with like I thought I was going to build this thing a certain way, then I learned a late stage game mechanic like, oh, I wish I could just start over with my character. And there was a definite gamer like empathy in the story for that particular element. But again, the story really doesn't ever let the main character feel super overpowered, but there's still nice progression. It's a very good detailed system that's fairly consistent. So I'm like, yeah, it was really enjoyable to see the progression and see how the build was going. Not to say the story is entirely perfect. Again, I had some early issues with like, and I understand why these elements of the story exist. It's just that there was like slight inconsistencies with the main character's background. He is on Earth. He was a very successful, savvy businessman in his 50s who's supposed to have been a lifelong gamer. Yet when he is introduced to character creation, he makes some. He comes out very naive, like, "Oh, what do these stats mean?" And I know it exists, literally just for the reader. Like, oh, this is what strength is. This is what wisdom is. This is what all the stats mean. And that's information that has to be conveyed to you as a reader. It's just like annoying to me, like the main character who's supposed to be lifelong was like, what are these stats? And again, tiny annoyance. It's a little mean nitpicking. In addition, some of the early choices he made is like, oh yeah, this super shady guy here is offering you a deal. And you're like, and he's supposed to be like, again, a 50-year-old savvy business. Like, I guess I'll just accept that without questioning it. And again, I understand from a storytelling point of view, he's setting up an antagonist that becomes a recurring foe later on in the story. So I get it. It's still just minor things, but still doesn't actually take away from my enjoyment of the story. It's just like early stuff was like, oh, okay, this is, I get why you're doing it. I wish it would have been slightly better, but that's kind of the only thing I could find in the story that was like even worth mentioning. Like, oh, this is not, otherwise just a great story. And again, by the end of the story, all that stuff pays off. Everything's done so well by the end. I was like, forget it. Minor annoyances are completely forgotten. I'm really having a good time with the story by the end. So even those little small things for me were like, not even worth thinking about much. But I do note them just because, like, okay, if you're having these same issues at the beginning of the story, I assure you they pay off by the end. Overall, I think the story struck a really good balance with the concept of purgatory as a middle battleground where sinners can redeem themselves. I'm not going to tell you what that means, but with good action RPG elements that you're going to be used to in LitRPG, good RPG progression. And I really like the late story kind of philosophy elements. It worked really well for me, and that's really what bumped it up from good to great. The story works well as a standalone story. Like, there really is a nice conclusion where you're like, if this is the only book in the series that's ever written, I'm okay with that. Like, this is a really nicely encapsulated story, but at the same time, there's room for other books in the series if like there's support from the reader, and that really, it really does matter, folks. If the author isn't getting sales, people don't seem to be buying this or reading this, he's not going to continue in the series. So if you like the series and you want to continue, really go read it. Leave a review that's positive so that the author knows that you enjoyed it. For me, though, it gets a score of 8 out of 10. That's a great review score. For Purgatory, the Devil's Game, with a score of 8 out of 10. And next up, we have Dungeon Walkers, book number 2 by Daniel Shinhofen. It is 471 pages, $4.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. Alistair Stern, Masterson, never expected to have the sort of life he found himself living. He was an irregular, a person who looked like the undead and had unusual perks, and his life hadn't been very pleasant, so he'd written off the idea of ever finding anyone who understood him. Then an old lady had asked for help, and he'd given it. Stern was able to rescue Seer Walslet's shard from the Bloodstone dungeon, after which he was brought before the city magistrate on false charges. Sauer helped him clear his name, and he was set free with the newly reborn Seer beside him. Although the rabbit Lycan had lived the rough life and died horribly inside the dungeon, she wasn't about to let that stop her from following her own dream. Seeing her determination, Stern offered to help her. Together they ran the starting dungeon so that Syra could develop the skills she would need to survive as a walker. Stern and Syra found a friend in Trish Moxie, an accomplished leather worker. That friend blossomed and grew, becoming something that none of them had expected. The new triad relationship and fledgling crew trained together in Darkstone, preparing to take on the next stage of dungeons. These would be much harder, but they felt like they had a chance if they worked together. After Darkstone, they set out for Wattle Rock. They were intent on finding people to fill out their crew, knowing they would need more allies for what the future held. And there was a warning for the author saying this book contains non-standard relationships and touches upon adult situations. I feel like that novel description is like, here's a summary for book 1, and the last paragraph is just what we're doing at the start of book 2. That's very much what it is. This story is, first disclosure, I received Vance copy for you. I purchased a copy when it became available. This is mostly a slice of life story with the same characters from book 1, which is described in the novel description, and dungeon diving stuff. Dungeon diving mechanics are the same. Don't expect anything different. The main group is expanding by taking on a couple new members, and honestly, the first half of the story is really a lot more about those new characters' backstory, developing them, making you have some emotional connection to them, so that when bad stuff happens in book number 2, you care. You have some kind of investment in it. Most of the action hits mid-story to late story. The early stuff, I think there's just one dungeon diving section. The rest of it is a lot of talking and like character development and like exploring in the city, studying a couple antagonists as they go from city to city, whatever. But again, if you're most of the action is going to be like mid to late kind of story. So there's a lot more action there. And that's perfectly fine. That's just the way it's set up. And that's what a slice of life story is. A lot of story. This story is very slice of life. There's unfortunately not a hugely powerful antagonist. There's not a hugely there's not a plot necessarily. Like there very much is a goal for the story in developing these new characters. But as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, look, there's a new pretty girl introduced in this story. And I'm like, I know Shinhofen. I've read his stories before. I'm like, how long is it going to take before she becomes part of their polyamorous relationship? And I was like, by then it's like, I thought so. That brother was in the way. I was glad that the author didn't like murder him off or something, but he definitely eventually got him out of the way so that third person that third woman could be like, very much. That's one of the only kind of things that I was a little slightly disappointed in the story is like there's no like real book antagonist. Like there is an antagonist. There's a couple like small ones, and there's one section towards the end where it's like, oh, okay, this guy's coming back. That's a perfectly good like villain to have towards the end of the story. It's just that for the most of it, for like 75% of it, there's really no like problems for the main character. There's no like main person who's opposing them or antagonistic force. And again, that's more of a reflection of the slice of life nature of the story. So overall, this is a good story if you're okay with, again, with the more casual slice of life pacing and polyamorous relationship. Although I will note that I was surprised that there wasn't graphic sex in the story. Like for a lot of the stuff that the author writes, that's very much a part of the storytelling, and it's important for the character relationship building. And in this story, no, it's referred to. Like there are references like, oh, they wake up together, or we're going to go off to bed and have a good time. But there's no like astrographic sex. So this is one of those series where you're like, oh, if that's something that bothers you, no, not really here in the story. So you can still enjoy it, have a good time without having to worry about, cutaway scenes with graphic sex necessarily. So that's a plus for some readers. For other readers, like, oh, not as much. For me, it gets score 7.3 out of 10. That's Dungeon Walkers book number 2 with a score of, again, 7.3 out of 10. Okay, next up is going to be Battlefield Reclaimer, Guardians of the Astrofall book number 1, written by David North. It is 886 pages. It is $5.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. Across the world of Astrofall, there are unique classes, but not all of them can be trained. They require quests and accomplishments that simply don't exist in the world. Some say the world law itself is broken and that the world is falling apart. In comes San Hastern. His family has been cursed by one of these classes for the last 50 years, no one ever having managed to level it, condemning them to the lowest paying jobs and life in a barren village. The class is called Battlefield Reclaimer. There is one more little problem. Sam's about to have it even worse when a dungeon exploration leaves him looking distinctly non-human. So there we go. This is actually an online serial story that's collected and edited and put together for your enjoyment. The start of the story is probably the hardest portion of me to kind of get through. And it's not because it was bad adventure stuff. It was just that there's an issue for me, particularly with multiple perspectives. My brain has a hard time distinguishing sometimes when there are multiple perspectives in the story and there's no clear indicator saying that there's a shift. So at the beginning of the story, you're popping in between multiple characters, the main character, his dad, other people sometimes, and sometimes in the same paragraph, or just like paragraphs next to each other. There's really no like physical thing in the book, like ... or like a little line or something saying, oh, there's a character shift, perspective shift here. And instead it's just left for you to figure out by contextual clues saying, oh, now I'm going to say the main character's name, my son, the main character. And it happens sometimes mid or after the shift where it's like, oh, main character will talk for a couple paragraphs and then suddenly someone else is saying, oh, my son. And I'm like, oh, wait. So for the last 3 paragraphs, it's actually been the dad's point of view. And I have to reread it because now my mental lens has to shift to that character's point of view because sometimes the context of the story just really does shift. And that's probably one of the big things I was like a little bit off-putting just from a reading standpoint. But as the story continues on, the author actually does start to include these contextual indicators, like just like little lines or like little dots saying, oh, the perspective is shifting, and that made it much easier to read once that does occur. Another thing helps is that the fact that the story starts to focus more on the main character as the story does continue on. Overall, this is a life-size story. Again, it's an online serial. Where the main character's family are stuck with the broken class. No one knows how to advance, and so they're poor and they're stuck, and that's kind of the setup for him being his woe is me situation. There's a good bit of character development and background in the beginning of the story, but mostly this is a dungeon dive story. Once the main character and his dad have a dungeon accident and they're transported to this unfamiliar place in this new dungeon, and they have to escape there and find their way out, and that's the dungeon dive. That is the story. The almost 90% of the story takes place in that underground labyrinth kind of location, and it is from there that they do their monster hunting. They find out clues on how to advance that Battlefield Reclaimer class. And that's really where the enjoyment of the story is, like finally empathizing the characters and it's like, oh, I'm glad you unlocked your class, and what does this mean for you, and how is this tied in with like a larger epic storyline, which very much does. Like there's a good bit of world building done even within like this one setting, and setting up world building elements like, oh, this is what happened in the past, and this is why this occurred to you, and this is what's going to happen in the future, and how this main character is supposed to be like kind of this chosen one element that's eventually weaved into it. But a lot of it is just like, oh, this is what your class can do. This is kind of cool. Let's explore this. What are you going to choose to advance? A lot of good RPG class progression stuff, which is kind of the core of what LitRPG is, for at least for me, and seeing enough details like, oh, I wouldn't make that choice. I'd make that other choice. This is how I would build my own character from this information. There's plenty of good RPG crunchy goodness in the story. And again, like nice action adventure, dungeon crawling kind of stuff. The game mechanics, again, are really solid. You see very regular level ups, skill, class, ability progressions, nice crunchy notifications, good stuff there. So there's nothing to complain about on that RPG side of stuff. Even some of the XP wand waviness where it's not consistent is kind of explained away in the story in a very kind of nice lore focused way. So even if it is a little inconsistent, it's explained in the story as far as the lore. It's like, okay, I can accept as long as I'm getting good explanation where the math is inconsistent sometimes through the XP distribution. Perfectly cool with that, as long as that inconsistency is consistent, if you know what I mean. So overall, it's a good action focused dungeon kind of crawl story, and I'm glad to see them get out of it by the end of the book, and see where they explore in the larger world, hopefully more world development stuff. But for now, it gets a score of 7.7 out of 10. That's a really good review score for me, though. Battlefield Reclaimer, a LitRPG progression epic guardian of Asterfall, book number 1, with the score of 7.7 out of 10. Hey, next up is Biomancer, New Era Online, Biomancer book number 1 by Shimura Kuznets. It is 609 pages, $4.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and here's the author's description. A new series in the New Era Online universe from the author who brought you Life Reset. John Slater never had any interest in video games. Now he's got to beat one to save his brother. A battle-hardened ex-Special Forces soldier, John was never a fan of games, unlike his brother. But now he's got to learn fast if he has any chance of saving his younger sibling. Magic, monsters, and levels are new to him, and his real-world skills aren't as useful as he thinks. Like it for him, he's used to adapting on the fly, and soon the world will know why his squadmates called him Seraph, the Death Angel. And there's a note. Now they're saying the events of the Biomancer happen after Life Reset. The two plot lines are not directly connected, however, and can be read independently. And that's very true in this story. While it is set in the, I call it the Life Reset universe, it's technically the New Era Line universe. You can very much read this as you don't have to have read the other series, but you're going to get some extra Easter eggs if you haven't. That other series really is entertaining, so you should read it anyways. The author, however, in this story brings a unique class to the story with unique powers, abilities that combine curse build with an organic crafting and building system. So I like the combo there. The setup for the story is really concise, which I honestly appreciate. Sometimes the introductions to these story worlds and like why the character is in the game or trapped or whatever goes on for pages and pages and pages. And I'm like, okay, I get it. I don't need this. And this one is super concise. So again, I really appreciate it. You get the motivation. He's trying to save his brother, but he's really in the story very quickly. I actually really liked the way the main character was what he's willing to go through to save his brother and to get in the game. Because by this point in the universe, nobody's playing this game anymore because it was super dangerous. And in other series, everybody got trapped and they were eventually released through the storyline. And so the government's like, no, nobody's playing this game. We're just going to use it for research. And these virtual intelligences can do whatever they want to do. And so the main character actually has to overcome their challenges and figure out how to get into the game, which is, again, a nice little real world, interesting story arc. But again, once the main character in the story, it very much is this kind of level grind, which is, again, very simple. Lots of action, lots of character progression, lots of exploring what his class does. But in addition, it's not just that. There is also some NPC interactions with the starting village and the other antagonists in the story. All that is developed as well. But mostly, really, is just like he spends a lot of time figuring out how to get past all these monsters who are much higher level than him and figure out how to use this system that is sort of ported over from book one in base development, and how that increases his power structure, and how it allows some other options besides just trying to hit straightforward, head for monsters and try to beat them, even though he doesn't understand his skills initially. So there's a lot of good stuff here, but again, very action focused. Overall, it's a solid story. Fans of Life Reset are going to be like, okay, this is familiar. They're familiar notes in the character class, in the village building stuff. They're going to be like, oh, that's a twist on what I saw here. If you haven't read that series, it's all going to be fresh, and you're probably going to really enjoy it because it is a unique system. For me, I had a good time with it. Gives it a 7.6 out of 10. That's a very solid, good score. That's Biomancer, New Era Online, with a score of, again, 7.6 out of 10. And last this week is going to be the online manga Solo Spellcaster. That's actually 63 chapters as of the recording date. It is free online. There is no English publisher, so everything is fan translated. Here is the manga description. The ordinary salaryman, Park Do-hyuk, finally got the awakening he had always wished for in life or death situation. Unbelievably, the memories and experiences from the game he spent his entire life in his 20s playing became those powers of awakening. What's more, it was a 1 in a billion triple awakening. The extraordinary player Park Do-hyuk's journey picks up now as he aims to reach the world's peak. And there's a note saying this is a webtoon adaptation of the popular web novel by Cheng Chu. Okay, this is a slice of life dungeon crawl story set in the modern world. So it very much is modern world setting, concrete buildings, etc. It just has dungeons and hunters exploring the stories, which is familiar to anybody who's read these kind of stories. Dungeons, if they aren't conquered, they spill out monsters. And so there's a whole social environment that evolves for these systems, where people who get these system powers can go into dungeons and conquer them to help people keep them safe, and guilds develop. There's a whole familiar system here. The main character, his thing is that he's a nobody. He really is a normal person going on about his business, and then one day he awakens to his power, and it's a rare triple awakening that he gets, not one class but 3. And part of the story is him exploring how he can use these different classes to become overpowered. And even though he has to work, 3 times as hard to do them. And so he has to dungeon dive, explore his abilities, all while trying to stay under the radar from the guilds that might want to squash him because he's too powerful. So there's a lot of good interactions, but it's mostly a dungeon diving story with like some occasional antagonists from other guilds or other associations towards like the more recent chapters in the story. So overall, I had a good time with it. I think it's the art's nicely done. It's there's a little bit of crafting in here, but it's an enjoyable read, and the chapters come out very regularly on a weekly basis, which is another thing that I personally enjoy. So that's a Solo Spellcaster. Gets a good solid 7.4 good review score out of 10. That's again Solo Spellcaster with a score of 7.4 out of 10. Is it for the show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening, for watching. You can follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, at our website at LitRPGpodcast.com. You can listen to the show on Spotify and Audible. And of course, any podcasting app out there you have. We have links in the show notes for all those locations to find us and follow the podcast and see all the latest reviews that we shoot out on a regular basis. And of course, we also have links to several LitRPG Facebook groups where authors and readers come together or give out recommendations for their stories. A lot of people seeking recommendations for new things. They get addicted to the genre, like, what do I read next? And a lot of people have recommendations. If you enjoy the podcast, remember you can support us and find out all the ways to support us at litrpgpodcast.com/support. And until we can hang it again, folks, thank you very much for listening, for watching, for letting me into your lives. And until we can hang it again, remember to go read some Lit RPG. Goodbye, everybody.